something that is relatively easy to notice is that we certainly live in a universe that grows. A universe that seems to grow things that have a clear genesis, and then the sort of adolescent phase, and then there's, I guess, adult phase, where you're sort of at your best. And then you definitely continue to grow, but it's not upward, I guess. Some things continue to grow and other things start to go the other way towards a clear end. But the universe slash reality seems efficient because it doesn't just end completely like that organism and that thing, that entity disassembles, but the things and parts and most basic elements of that thing become something else. You know, even if it's as simple as the basic matter and makeup of something dying in a forest makes it part of that forest by various means. And that's true for planets and humans and every species on Earth, and even a season of basketball or a season of football or an economy or a civilization. It has this sort of overall organism feel to it. And it would be interesting if you could take, like, the US public or something, or really any group of people, and somehow have every word and thought and action that they've had and summarize their basic makeup in a sentence or a paragraph. At least a snapshot in this current moment in time. It would just be an interesting hypothetical, because I think things like that, whether it's a human being or a society or a political party, it also it has a personality. It has an overarching collective sort of personality that it is not too dissimilar from a single person. And the same can be said for a basketball team during its season. It has its beginning and it has this sort of period of time in the middle where previous events impact future events. And at the beginning of the season, you kind of have this birth feeling where the only thing that you have anything to compare anything to is the previous season, but so much has changed and you have this sense of rebirth in a new season, even if it's the same team. You have this feeling of growth. And it's interesting how something as simple as a little tiny seed can become a massive tree. It's like this little seed gets just plucked into the dirt, and in this one spot, the contents of the seed rearrange the contents of the soil and the air into this specific thing. It's like it pulls from its immediate surroundings, and the information in the seed is more like this little pocket of organization. And then it grows and grows and grows, and it doesn't even need to know what it is to do that. That's sort of the argument for an underlying consciousness in all things, is that who or what is it that is aware? Who knows? I mean, do things have to have at least some degree of knowing to continue to take on their form on a day-to-day basis and act and function? Or do we not need to know at all any information? I mean, it's pretty it's on the nose to have a brain, because that's something different. Something with a brain but not all things with brains, can know. But something like a tree, this little seed ends up this giant specific thing, and then there's such variety. Like, why? I mean, crazy variety, like exotic variety. This giant forest. And man, it looks like, to me, like from an external point of view, like if I were flying over a forest, to me it looks more like a bunch of nerve endings, and the soil and what's under the soil being the sort of membrane on the outside of like a brain, you know. It's like the whole thing is just this organism, and it is intelligent. It has to be. And interdependent, yes. But there wasn't a thing growing in there that was so conscious and effective at rearranging its surroundings to change it dramatically until human beings came around. And we didn't even know that for the longest time. It's crazy how knowing in and of itself has a momentum, you know. Because you can exist for a great period of time. Like I said previously, fragmented, and the development of what you know can remain relatively limited, you know. Because of course, like what else are you supposed to do? If you get to bows and arrows, you have a pretty good advantage. You know, you're starting, but that click, you know, that there's almost like a critical mass. You get to the point where you have curtains and windows and amenities. That's when things are really accelerating. When you're starting to do things now for convenience, to make things easier, not just for survival itself. Conveniences. And like I said, you don't have to know ahead of time. Like right now, we don't really have to know exactly where we're going. We just need to have a sensation, a feeling, an optimistic blend of what has been and what is now. That sort of brings us forward. We don't really have to know. It really is a feeling that is deeply rooted in what we can know to be true, you know. It has to be that. It can't be anything but that. And it's like New York City. New York City started out as this relatively random point where people met to trade. People would roll up on little boats, and they would trade, and then they would leave. And over time, at first it was the Dutch, and it was called New Amsterdam before it was New York City. And it just sort of grew. And it was a nice little city, you know, and it just grew and grew and became larger and larger. And then eventually the British took it over. It became New York. But that's how so many cities have started. They have just started at these little places, these little trading outposts with no structures whatsoever. Usually the point between other cities that's, I guess, as equidistant as possible, where people traded and talked, and it just grew. And at that time, when those people were meeting, of course, they had no idea that where they are was eventually going to be the financial center of the world, or such a large, massive place as New York City. They didn't have to know that, but they were the seed. They were that little piece of intelligence that rearranged its surroundings. And you can only imagine the places that spot drew from and collected from globally. I'm sure the steel came from far away, and I'm sure a lot of the material that ended up becoming what New York City is, the stone and the concrete, every element, I'm sure it drew from far corners of the planet, almost like a seed, drawing from its surroundings and collecting it and shaping it and turning it into bark and leaves and everything that makes up a tree, even apples, which is strange. Sometimes I look at fruit and I think to myself, how? Like, that's amazing that not only does a little seed rearrange its local environment into this specific thing, but it also bears fruit. And a person can literally just walk up and pluck it and eat it and get nourishment from it. It's like the tree is saying, don't eat me, eat this instead. You know, it's like it's offering something. And even stranger, there's that combination of things that, you know, can be like an apple, be nourishing, and there's other things that are poisonous, you know, but not poisonous to everyone. Poisonous to humans, yes, but out of the same planet comes this insane diversity, genetic diversity. And that, to me, is an ongoing question, what exactly that is, but you could certainly consider Earth an organism, very much humming. It's like a bastion, a little blip for life. And it would be cool to take every atom, every cell of Earth and know it so intimately that you could summarize it in a statement or a paragraph that is the most true set of symbols and words for Earth, you know. It would be cool to do that with anything, to be honest, because that's kind of what we do anyway, because we are this synergy of all known true things, as well as untrue things, but ideally true things. And those things arise in various situations and contexts as a sensation, and then we take, to the best of our ability, symbols and words to describe that sensation. And then that gets kind of sent out to other people and they give you feedback. And even that, a conversation has a kind of growth to it. And it can have a genesis, this kind of high point, and then this point where it winds down and the people depart. And they're just a little bit different depending on the quality of the conversation. And it completely depends as well on the nature of the two people, because chemistry is a strange thing. Two people can find each other and suddenly become this single thing without even knowing it, or maybe definitely knowing it. But that just happens too, you know. And to me, that's the nature of love itself right there, you know. And it has definitely become my opinion that there is one person for whom you can grow into something that is specific to both of you, and it's only possible because of the both of you. And honestly, I think that's the greatest thing. Because love definitely grows, just like everything else. And movements grow, societal movements grow, they come, they have a genesis, and it's hard to determine or say exactly what it is that's gonna spark like that. You know, there have been people who tried to start movements and completely failed because we just can't really say what's gonna catch on. You know, sometimes it's like sending sparks into a wet pile of leaves. Like you have the pile of leaves there, you just can't see the water. And other times there are situations that are like tinder, just waiting for a spark, and it's just the tiniest little spark just sets it ablaze. And that thing will have a life of its own for a while, and it'll affect other areas until it is absorbed by the society, and it's etched into the books and etched into time, and it's a good society can maintain through the extremes, the social extremes, as long as the basic building blocks aren't compromised, as long as they aren't removed, then a society can grow over time. It can ebb and flow, and it can have extremes, and it can have social revolutions, political revolutions, but not so extreme that they challenge the very basic nature of it. And the United States doesn't really seem susceptible to such a revolution, or doesn't need such a revolution, because it has enough building blocks and enough true things about it to keep just a huge portion of people generally happy. I mean, what more could you want? And with that question, I would say a lot of the things that we could want, we may be already in the process of building without knowing it. Because if you have the essential elements of a decent and good society, then I think it's inevitable that you're always in the process of building the thing that you want without knowing it. Just like New York City, just like a tree. To me, so long as you have those elemental things, just like a person, if a person has these elemental things, they'll grow into something, they'll become something for which they know nothing about. And later in life, it's only in retrospect that you can connect the dots. And sometimes when you're young, you're prepared for certain things intentionally. And sometimes you get into that, and sometimes you don't. You don't always, end up going headfirst into what you've been prepared for your whole life. Sometimes that's just not what you grow into. Sometimes you rebel against that. Sometimes you just completely defy it. And one of the great ironies of life is sometimes doing something to prevent something from happening is exactly what was needed to cause it. And we can't really know for sure if what we're doing is causing something or preventing it. So, it's good to be wise. It's good to know what the things that you're saying and doing, at least to some degree, mean. It's good to have a decent body and corpus of read material, and it's good to have listened to a lot of people and seen what a lot of people have done with themselves, because it gives you a much better idea of what even you're capable of, even what human beings are capable of. And at the same time, it's healthy to have a thrust of your own, not always an observer, but an actor as well. It's always going to be some synergy of these opposing things. And it's interesting too how we can go quite some time, maybe even a lifetime, with all kinds of understanding and all kinds of true things for which we'll never be able to put into words. Because like I've said previously, there's always a near infinite amount of true things at any given time. And those things are always mixing together and synergizing and rejecting and in a state of play as well as war. Denials and agreements, even within our own bodies, all the time. And it's always changing into something new. And then sometimes even into something old. But our attention really is the magic. Because our attention kind of reminds me of time. Because as time goes on, out of the infinite sea of potential, out of the infinite amount of hypothetical events that could unfold, there's only one that ends up being etched into time. There's only one event. And with our attention, there's a near infinite, you could say infinite, amount of true things. But what our attention ends up noticing is the only thing that participates with time as it passes. I mean, it's possible to sit there and think about the future, theoretical futures, and it's possible to sit there and revel in the past, review memories and do that. But even while that's happening, you're never anywhere else. You're always still here, etching into time. You're still growing in some form or another into a figure that's yet to be determined. It's still TBD on that. And we can never really be anywhere else but in that one place where time is being etched, even if our attention is somewhere else. And our attention is a changing circle. It's a circle that is sometimes a point that it's so tight and fine, and other times it's a larger circle that's kind of pulled out and away. And it can see from a very abstract, far away and distant point of view to where it can almost reach objectivity, very, very close. And it can be so subjective and so tight that it's basically a point, and you're so focused on what you're doing. And this moment is so important and all-consuming that abstract thought is essentially impossible. And it's those two extremes that attention exists within. And really the ultimate truth is what's happening in real time, but it's pretty interesting how when you're at that level of focus, due to the fact that there's almost no abstract thought, you have to review it later to really think about what happened. Like, there's been countless situations where people have been in very extreme events, and they talk about it like they were in a dream, like it's this haze, or even like they see red, or they black out, or they're just in this hyper fixated zone where they're responding to their environment, to what's happening, even if it's like incredible violence. That specific situation has a way of focusing you so much on the present that abstract thought just basically disappears. Like, you're not even thinking about the future, the past, like you're there, and you have to kind of dissect it later to figure out what it means. And that moment can be so jarring because people aren't used to being that focused. It's like a critical point in a game, where it's like you have 4 seconds left, you have to make a winning shot. It's like you have to not think about the meaning of what's happening. It's just another shot at the same time, yet you have to move with the urgency, knowing that it's potentially a game-winning shot. And that will give you adrenaline. It'll make your heart race faster. It changes you physically in the moment. And letting it sink in takes some time. Letting it sink in is the same thing as the mind having its time to view it abstractly in context with everything else, everything that came before it, and everything that's still unfolding. How does that fit in your life? How does that fit with everything else, And it takes time for that to settle, such a high point, such a fine tipped point. And that is the growth of a person in general. Sort of, it's almost like a fast forward button, it's like it moves things in you. It's like that video that I made called Motion and Emotion. It's so true how much emotions and emotion operate under the same principles, and how much emotion is internal motion, and it's motion from person to person, from outside to inside. And such things are, as they would say, character developing. They are wisdom developing, intelligence developing. And the key really is not only to have these moments, because we're all going to have moments where the etching in time, the present, whatever you want to call it, grabs our attention so much that it consumes us completely. You have to be able to go back to and decipher that and put it into symbols and words. That's just as important as the event itself. Otherwise, it'll just be buried in memories and you won't even know what it means. You might have to dig it out later with a therapist or somewhere else. It's just as important to have the words later, especially as a human being, because that's what we are. That's our speciality, is binding time. It's turning time into a linear motion. It's finding the proper symbols for reality as well in order to convey it not only to other people but to ourselves as well. We are this strange thing where, like I said, we don't know what we're becoming. We don't know what we're growing into, but we do have the ability to symbolize what's happening and infer something and get quote-unquote knowledge or information out of it. But that's the essential step. It's one thing to have these experiences. It's another to discuss them or even think about them yourself. Like, spend actual time thinking about things, because even thought has a growth. It has a genesis, it has a high point, and it has a come down too. But you need to take it all the way through all three steps between the two extremes, between the genesis and the end. That's how you complete a concept, and you can physically feel it in you, like twisting like gears, and fitting in different spots and fitting in different contexts and different meanings and different situations. Like, you think it all the way through and you can feel it, a concept or an idea grow as it collects from other concepts and other ideas and becomes a larger and larger thing, and it moves faster, and things that move faster are heavier. Just like in the real world, the faster you move, the heavier you get. You tend to collect matter when you move quickly. And thinking is like a little fast forward button, and you have to do it, really. If you don't spend much time doing it, I really think you'll end up with this kind of hole, this kind of thing. Even though you've had a rich experience, even though you've lived well and done a lot of things, maybe you'll have this sensation that something isn't quite there or available, and maybe you just keep living, intensely, quickly. But you need to take time to think, because it's the other half of what growing is for a human. We need to know what we're becoming. We just need to. I don't really know why, but it's very satisfying to be able to think like that, at least 10 minutes straight where you're really thinking. And it's interesting too how for humans in our lifespan, in our lifetime, and over time societally, we sort of extended that high point by learning about Earth, reality, the world, medicine, psychology. We've learned more information about the world, and it's expanded the midpoint. We're living longer. And like I said, we don't know always what this stuff means, but as technology advances and things like this, we tend to live longer. There are exceptions, but all people today benefit from the modern day, even if they're kind of in far-flung parts of the world. My grandparents lived till about their mid-80s, and they were staunchly against hospitals. Like, they didn't like hospitals. They didn't like even modern medicine, They didn't like aspirin. But they benefited from the sanitation and the wisdom of today as well, which I think is a huge part of what extends that middle part. It's not just modern medicine, it's also modern wisdom. It's what we've collected in terms of knowledge and information so far. And it's in the way we cook and clean our homes, wash our clothes. It's the way we take showers every day. It's the way we have access to water and heat. And we just knew that we needed those things, you know? It's like the way that you know when you're really cold and it's snowing out that you need a jacket. It's like, it's going to extend your life, but it also feels good. You know, it's a sensation that you're cold, and you pop that jacket on, and all of a sudden you're feeling nice and toasty. It extends your life. It saves you from potentially freezing to death and frostbite, but it started with a sensation. And it's easy to look back and say, wow, that saved my life, just popping a coat on there, something that simple. But, you know, that's how you complete that arc of growing, and you'll probably buy a coat and have maybe a collection of them, and you'll get to the point to where you're not only have 5 or 10 coats, but some of them that actually look good and are fashionable and have other purposes beyond just keeping you alive. It makes you look good too. And that is probably the end stage of having thought something out. You know, it's a series of sensations. Even the urge to look good, even the idea of maybe buying something that isn't just for utility purposes, it's also to look good, is sort of the finishing touches on a series of sensations that have thoughts associated to them. But all things are like that. You know, they get more complicated, but the way something makes you feel is important, but you can think about it too and understand its context as well, because context is super important when talking about human attention and the passage of time. A person that's able to adequately assess context is like a superhuman, because you have a much better understanding of what's being said and why. It's just like you get it all the time if you know context. And it's heavily weighted by a feeling in your chest, because that feeling is everything you know signaling. It's like a drum, you know, a sensational drum in your chest. It tells you things, you know. It's hard to ignore, and if you do ignore it, it's something that I wouldn't recommend, because it's part of you growing. It's part of growth itself. It's a continuation of all things, you know, in you. And yeah, I definitely would listen to that.